Imagine a world bathed in flickering candlelight, where faith was the very bedrock of existence, and the divine felt palpable, close enough to touch. In the medieval age, spiritual power wasn't an abstract concept. It was a tangible force, often believed to reside within the very remains of saints. These were the holy relics, fragments of bone, wisps of hair, threads of fabric, revered as direct conduits to the miraculous. But what happens when the demand for the divine far outstrips its supply? As the veneration of saints soared, an astonishing practice emerged within the sacred walls of monasteries: the sophisticated art of forging holy relics. This isn't a tale of simple fraud, but a complex tapestry woven with piety, survival, and a profound, perhaps desperate, human need for the miraculous. In the heart of the European Middle Ages, faith was not merely a belief system. It was the very lens through which life was experienced. Every village had its patron saint, every church its sacred treasures. Saints were seen as intermediaries, celestial advocates who could intercede with God on behalf of humanity. Their stories, often embellished with tales of incredible miracles and unwavering devotion, fueled an insatiable spiritual hunger. Pilgrimages became epic journeys of faith, with devout travelers enduring immense hardships to visit shrines, all driven by the profound hope of touching something holy, something that promised divine intervention. This era laid the foundation for the extraordinary power that relics would come to wield, shaping not just spiritual life, but also the very fabric of medieval society. Why were these fragments, these bones of power, so highly prized? The belief was simple yet profound. Physical contact with a saint's remains, or even objects they had touched, could channel their holiness. Miracles of healing, protection from plague, fertility, and even victory in battle were all attributed to the presence of relics. Monasteries and cathedrals that possessed significant relics became magnets for pilgrims, transforming into centers of spiritual authority and immense wealth. Donations flowed in, land was bequeathed, and the very prestige of an institution became inextricably linked to the authenticity and potency of its sacred collection. This wasn't just about faith, it was about power, influence, and the very survival of monastic life, creating a powerful incentive for accumulation. As the veneration of saints exploded across Europe, an inevitable problem arose. Supply simply couldn't keep up with demand. There were only so many original apostles, martyrs, and early saints whose remains could be distributed. Every new church, every ambitious monastery, desired its own patron saint, its own piece of the miraculous. Bishops needed relics for consecrations, abbots needed them to attract pilgrims, and rulers sought them to legitimize their rule. The pressure to acquire these sacred objects became immense, creating a spiritual vacuum that threatened to destabilize the very institutions reliant on them. It was this intense scarcity, this yearning for the sacred, that began to push the boundaries of piety, leading some down a path of questionable authenticity. Before outright forgery became widespread, one accepted, albeit controversial, method of relic acquisition was furta sacra, sacred theft. This wasn't considered common larceny. Rather, it was often framed as a divine act, where a saint chose to be moved to a more worthy or prominent shrine. Monks would undertake daring expeditions, sometimes in disguise, to raid crypts in distant lands, believing they were serving God's will. The translation of Saint Foy from Agen to Conques in the 9th century is a famous example, transforming a minor abbey into a major pilgrimage site. This practice, while ethically ambiguous by modern standards, demonstrated the extreme lengths to which monastic communities would go to secure these invaluable spiritual assets, blurring the lines between piety and pragmatism. For many monasteries, relics were not merely symbols of faith, they were economic lifelines. The donations of pilgrims supported the monks, funded expansions, and maintained charitable works. A monastery without a significant relic risked fading into obscurity, its coffers dwindling, its very existence threatened. Imagine the abbot of a struggling abbey, faced with crumbling walls and a dwindling community. The pressure to provide a spiritual focal point to attract the faithful would have been immense. In such desperate circumstances, where the greater good of the institution and its mission was at stake, the lines between what was permissible and what was not began to blur profoundly. The needs of the community often outweighed the strictures of literal truth. When genuine relics were unavailable and theft too risky, a new solution emerged: creation. But what did a monk's workshop for forging relics look like? It wasn't a dark, nefarious den, but often a quiet corner within the monastery walls. The materials were mundane: animal bones, perhaps from a local churchyard where forgotten burials lay. Old linen, stained and yellowed, could pass for ancient burial shrouds. Earth from a holy site, or even ordinary dust mixed with fragrant herbs, could be presented as sacred dust. The skill wasn't just in finding the materials, but in imbuing them with the aura of antiquity and sanctity, a quiet, almost meditative process of pious fabrication, carried out with a strange blend of reverence and deception. Forging a relic wasn't just about finding old bones. It was about crafting a compelling narrative of authenticity. Inscriptions would be carefully etched onto bone or placed within a reliquary, detailing the saint's name and martyrdom. False provenance documents, meticulously aged, would be discovered. Often, a newly found relic would be accompanied by a carefully orchestrated miracle, a sudden healing, a divine sign, to solidify its legitimacy in the eyes of the faithful. These were not crude deceptions. They were often sophisticated operations, leveraging the prevailing beliefs and the power of storytelling. The monks understood that the spiritual power of a relic was as much about the belief it inspired as it was about its physical composition. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of relic forgery is the concept of pious fraud. Many monks engaged in these deceptions not out of malice or simple greed, but from a genuine belief that they were serving a greater good. If a fake relic inspired genuine faith, drew pilgrims, and led to spiritual solace or even perceived miracles, was it not, in some profound sense, real in its effect? The power of belief was immense. A sick pilgrim, convinced they were touching the bone of a saint, might experience a psychological effect that mirrored a physical healing. For the monks, if a fabrication brought people closer to God and sustained their community, the means might have been justified by the end. The line between truth and spiritual utility was often deeply blurred. The success of a newly acquired or fabricated relic could be instantaneous and transformative. Stories of miraculous healings and divine interventions would spread like wildfire through the medieval grapevine. Pilgrims, drawn by these tales and the promise of salvation, would flock to the monastery, bringing with them donations of coin, produce, and labor. A previously obscure abbey could quickly ascend to prominence, becoming a celebrated pilgrimage destination, its reputation enhanced, its coffers overflowing. This influx of wealth and spiritual prestige allowed monasteries to expand, commission grand artworks, and continue their charitable endeavors, further cementing the perceived divine approval of their sacred collection, whether authentic or not. The cycle of faith and finance was self-perpetuating. While faith was paramount, not everyone was easily swayed. Even in the Middle Ages, voices of skepticism occasionally emerged. Bernard of Clairvaux, a highly influential abbot, famously criticized the excesses of relic veneration and, implicitly, the potential for fraud. Tales circulated of pilgrims discovering blatant forgeries, leading to scandal and questioning of the monastic orders. Popes issued decrees attempting to regulate the trade and authentication of relics, highlighting a tacit acknowledgement of widespread issues. These early doubts, though often suppressed, reveal a persistent tension between unshakable faith and a growing demand for verifiable authenticity, a tension that would only intensify in later centuries and ultimately reshape the religious landscape of Europe. How did the powerful church hierarchy react to this widespread phenomenon. It was a complex and often contradictory response. While outright forgery was officially condemned, the practical reality was often different. Many bishops and even popes tacitly accepted or even benefited from the prestige and wealth generated by these pious frauds. Regulating the immense and often geographically distant network of monasteries was a monumental task. Instead, the Church sought to control the narrative, emphasizing the spiritual authenticity over the material, and eventually establishing more rigorous processes for relic authentication, like requiring episcopal approval. It was a delicate dance between maintaining religious authority and managing the inherent human desire for tangible connections to the divine, even if those connections were sometimes crafted from fiction. The medieval practice of forging relics left an indelible, if complex, legacy. With the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, the veneration of relics, and indeed their authenticity, came under fierce attack, leading to widespread destruction and debunking. Yet, even today, countless churches across Europe house relics whose origins are, at best, murky. What does this tell us about the human spirit? Perhaps it reveals our enduring need for tangible connection to the sacred, our willingness to believe, and the powerful role of narrative in shaping our understanding of truth. The monks who crafted these deceptions were not simply villains. They were products of their age, navigating a world where faith and survival were inextricably intertwined, leaving behind a fascinating chapter in the history of belief and ingenuity. The story of medieval monks forging relics is far more than a simple tale of fraud. It's a profound window into the anxieties, aspirations, and deep spiritual landscape of a bygone era. It speaks to the immense power of faith, the desperate lengths institutions would go to survive, and the enduring human desire for the tangible presence of the divine. These were not just objects. They were stories, vessels of hope, and sometimes sophisticated acts of pious deception, born from a world where the sacred and the profane often merged in unexpected ways. Their legacy reminds us how deeply our beliefs and the stories we tell can shape reality, blurring the lines between what is truly holy and what is merely human creation.